Hi, welcome back. I'm Dr. Lilach Saperstein, an educational audiologist, and in the previous two videos, which you can click on the link to see, we discussed what is hearing, how does hearing work, and also what are the many kind of challenges and emotions that come up when your child is diagnosed with a hearing loss. Today, I'd like to talk to you more about what are the options that are generally presented to parents when their child is diagnosed with a hearing loss. The first and most important thing I want to talk about is you have to define your goals in order to know if the intervention options, the things that are being offered to you, are going to help you reach those goals. And what are the different modalities that deaf and hard of hearing children use in order to communicate. So many times a new diagnosis is made and an audiologist will give the parents a lot of information about hearing aids, cochlear implants, and speech therapy, and a lot of the processes in order to get this child to hear as much as they can and speak as much as they can and kind of quickly close the gap on communication delays that are associated with hearing loss. And this, of course, is a very admirable and wonderful way to go and direction, and I fully support this kind of excellent use of technology, excellent use of resources in order to enhance your child's communication in an auditory oral mode. So that means using their ears and using their mouth in a typical mode of communicating. However, I would also like to stress that there's another option, and the other option is sign language. Using sign language as a primary mode of communication typically occurs in families where there are other deaf individuals using sign language. And so that it seems to be like there's been a split, an exclusivity between deaf families using sign language with their deaf children or deaf family members, and hearing parents wanting only their children to be hearing, to be like them, to get all the devices and hearing aids or cochlear implants in order to make them as hearing as possible, just like the parents are. And this is 100% natural and 100% valid and miraculous, really, that those that trajectory is even possible now with the advent of all these technologies. However, I would like to present to you that it's possible to have a meshing of these two modalities and to actually introduce sign language or some sort of additional communication mode for children with hearing loss, even when you're going the auditory oral route and using hearing aids, amplification, or cochlear implants. Many proponents of the auditory oral mode will say that using sign language is actually detrimental to the auditory oral development because it is a bit of a crutch. It is used as a shortcut or an easy way out from having to do the hard work of developing speech and working on your motor development of speech, and of course developing the neural pathways that are necessary in the rehab process. And I totally understand that. Again, I understand that. However, sometimes it comes at a cost. Saying do not give any visual cues, cover the mouth when speaking or during therapies, and do not use any visual communication or gestural communication or sign language in order to have the child, that the child must depend on the auditory input in order to communicate. This is an excellent mode within the context of auditory therapy and oral rehab and all the things that we are working on to help the child adapt to the devices and to help the child communicate. But when this tips over into the level of frustration, into the level of not being able to communicate their needs and their wants, and not being able to have a two-way kind of interaction with other people, with peers, with parents, with family members, with teachers, then this becomes a detriment to that child. So I just wanted to put this idea out there for new parents or parents dealing with this for a long time, that there's this kind of dichotomy that's being presented as an either or option. You know, this argument is not only coming from the auditory oral world, it's also coming from the deaf ed world, where sometimes people who feel that deaf culture and sign language have been appropriated and should not be diluted, and I understand that as well. Of course, there's a long and rich history and culture associated with being deaf and the deaf capital D community, and I think that the most important thing that we can do for our children is to learn and see all of the resources that are out there and provide them with as much as we can. So if that means doing some sign language instruction and some speech-based therapy, then, and some combination of the two, then that's wonderful. And if you have an auditory verbal therapist who is dealing with a child that is really bottoming out with their ability, and they've maximized their auditory potential, but the child is still struggling to communicate, then why shouldn't that child be given another modality? There's, of course, also a whole other way of communicating, which we haven't even touched on, which is through picture exchange or different iPad apps, different communication devices, augmentative communication devices, AAC, alternative and augmentative communication devices, or activity boards, all these different ways that we can have a way in to communicate. There's a saying among speech therapists that is language over speech. That language in itself, and in the rich form of being able to communicate in any kind of modality, whether written, spoken, signed, that this really takes precedence over producing speech and being able to receive auditory inputs. As an audiologist, I know that this is a touchy kind of subject for a lot of my colleagues, because we are trained in maximizing auditory potential and understanding the needs of children who are hearing impaired, who are deaf, and knowing the implications on their educational, academic, social, and emotional lives. So we say, oh, here are options, here are solutions, whereas I don't see them as solutions and more as possibilities, intervention options, ways to get into that child's world. So I invite you to open up your horizons and to think about maybe looking into a dual modality program, or doing some signing at home, even basic signs, a way of getting in, of communicating, of having language and providing a language opportunity for your child. This video has been part 3 of our series. In the first video, we discussed the grief that comes along with the diagnosis and the role of you as the parent for your child. In the second video, I discussed how hearing works and what are the auditory pathway from the outer ear all the way up to the brain. Please join us over at the Facebook group and the Facebook page and leave any comments below. Feel free to reach out to me because I'm here to help, and you're doing the greatest thing that you can by advocating for your child, gaining information, and there's a lot of support and guidance out there for you. All the best.